Welcome to my channel, The Hidden Octave. In this video, we will be exploring the philosophy of Kritika Nakshatra through the lives and works of its avatars, its natives. The objective of this video is to present the many themes of this nakshatra in narrative form, such that its varied symbols and ideas are cohesively weaved together and easily digestible. What is the mission of this nakshatra? The problem it is created to solve is that of carnality, man dissolving into his savage self, where he is trapped in the pits of his own dark cave, churned to action not by the intellect, but by the instincts. The solution is setting the soul as a mediator, that it may take the reins and enlighten man's actions. Without Kritika, man is chased back and forth by the shadows of his own impulses, his lowered desires that serve no purpose but to unravel his inner beast, such that his soul is lost forever. Let us set the stage for Kritika Nakshatra. Kritika comes right after Bharani, which represents the introduction of man into the realm of earth. Bharani is a nakshatra ruled by one of Saturn's forms, Yama, and like Saturn, Bharani is the separator. Bharani has separated man from the direct experience of the light of his own soul by chaining him to his physical body. Bharani then proceeded to trap man within the teeth of Mother Nature, the wilderness of earth. Despite her title as Mother, Nature does not cradle her children lovingly and provide for them all that is needful for their strength and survival. Often referred to as a cruel mistress, her only desire is the survival of those fit of form and sharp of tooth. In every bush there lies in wait a savage beast, whose eyes are attuned to the frailty of both mind and body of the vulnerable passerby, and so it's every creature's responsibility to make themselves strong to resist them. This initial phase of Kritika emphasizes his Martian qualities, his survivalistic nature. Kritika Nakshatra represents man having to fend for himself within the wilderness with nothing but his animal intelligence as weapon. Bharani represents the jungle, but Kritika is man in the jungle, scavenging, harvesting, hunting, and mercilessly killing his enemies. One develops the most sophisticated strategies that are both highly effective but energetically economical, making use of very few materials to trap prey and kill beasts. Kritika is man spat out into the wild without defenses, without caretakers, and without guides. He is left alone to make his own path and fend for himself, knowing neither friend nor foe. This relates to the birth story of the god of this nakshatra, Kartikeya, whose other names include Saravanabhava, which means born amongst the reeds. Kartikeya, or Skanda, which is his other name, was born from the fiery seed of Lord Shiva, which dropped into the river Ganges.
God of Abraham, take my child into thy hands, that he may live to thy service.
As the child develops, since he is not socialized or tamed, he provokes great disturbances and with his voice of thunder wreaks havoc upon the land. But eventually, he is seen by the 6 of the 7 brightest star clusters in the night sky called Kritikas.
Look, there's something here. Be sure it's not a crocodile. Cynthia could charm tears from a crocodile.
In Hindu texts, who essentially adopt him and pacify him, Kritika is therefore a nakshatra connected to adoption or being an orphan. It's interesting that many of the most popular stories of orphans abandoned in the wilderness share a similar background. Samurai Jack, the popular Cartoon Network program developed by Genndy Tartakovsky, tells the story of a young samurai whose civilization and parents were attacked by a powerful foreign evil.
Long ago in a distant land, I, Aku, the shape-shifting master of darkness, unleashed an unspeakable evil. But a foolish samurai warrior wielding a magic sword stepped forth to oppose me.
He was taken away as a very young and fragile boy before he, too, could be consumed by it and sent to live a strict life of training to one day be strong enough to return and vanquish this evil. This theme of a young child with potential to slay evil, but being too young to do so, and needing to be kept hidden wonderfully parallels the story of Kartikeya being concealed from the demons that wished to destroy him first. The samurai begins his very difficult training, which involved developing all sorts of martial arts techniques and other faculties that he learned from the different cultures that he was brought up in. Again, since his own home was under the dominion of this foreign evil, he could not grow up there lest he be destroyed, and so he was taken to different cultures to be cared for. The samurai's father intended that he become one of the greatest of all warriors, and for this, he set up different teachers. A few examples are the following. From his African teacher, he learned the art of combat, particularly that of the ngini stick fighting.
This is the Umlangata. It is made from our land's strongest trees. We have 5 styles of technique. The cheetah, the snake, and the antelope.
From his Egyptian teachers, he learned hieroglyphics and other academic subjects. From another, he learned astronomy and how to use the stars as a map, etc. All these teachers taught him how to make use of the world around him to his advantage. He was taught a variety of fighting styles and taught how to be resourceful, how to identify a weapon, be it external or internal, to be able to defeat any force. This is beautiful because it illustrates the aspect of Kritika that is loved and nurtured by different mothers, or in this case, different cultures. In the legend, Kartikeya split himself into multiple forms to be able to learn and grow from all of the influences around him, as fire consumes everything around it, purifies it, and reduces it to their most useful essence. Only after the completion of his training does he then return to the land of his father, the king, to slay the great evil. Tarzan tells the story of a young boy whose parents were devoured by a ferocious leopard, and he was left to be raised by the native beasts, the gorillas. George of the Jungle, which was inspired by Tarzan, tells a similar story. Both of these tales are about man having to use his intelligence to survive in the wild. And of course, both of these stories are about orphans. Even one of the original creators of Batman was possibly a Kritika Mu native. Bruce Wayne, which is Batman's true identity, witnessed his own parents' death at a very young age and then vowed to avenge them. Weaved into this nakshatra are tales of survival, having no one on one side and needing to make ends meet on their own. Here the individual develops a silent and secretive nature, being always on the defensive, on the lookout for enemies. With no one to provide for him, he is left to distinguish what is edible from what is not edible on his own. One's parents and guardians are representative of society and its civilizing programs. Without them, man grows up untamed, without the necessary corrections and limitations necessary for his assimilation. Kritika is where man is left to determine for himself the true nature of things and their true value. As one of the most resourceful nakshatras, it can look at about anything and identify a tool. A twig becomes a toothbrush. A flat stone is a plate to heat one's food. A strong branch on a high tree is a place to hang one's hammock for resting. Kritika is the nakshatra of tools because to the man of the jungle, all things are an instrument if they are appropriately sharpened and mended and forged. The wilderness is a space of scarcity, so the mindset of the savage is that of making the most out of the little that surrounds it. Mercury in Kritika becomes a very good combination for one who can make a tool out of anything. A Kritika native's dream is to be able to fit all things into his pockets and pull them out like a Swiss Army knife, selecting a blade if he needs to gut a fish, or a lighter if he needs to make a fire. Likewise, this most minimalistic of nakshatras attempts to simplify and streamline their whole lives, selecting only the most practical of tools. This explains Kritika's strongly minimalistic preferences, reflected even in their sartorial choices. They are not ones to fuss too much about their appearance, instead preferring clothing that is simple and flexible. It is not that they are turned off by excess per se, but that in their eyes they already have more than what they need around them, even if in the eyes of others, their lives are stripped to the bare bones. In the beginning stages of Kritika, there is a greater concern over one's own self over others. one's own needs, one's own desires, and one's own survival. In the earliest stages of Kritika, we see these natives at their most Martian and individualistic. Even when they do open themselves up and include more people under their care, they still carry a sort of black and white mentality. In a world of struggle, scarcity, and strife, they know that they cannot concern themselves over everybody, or else they'll be stretched so thin they won't have enough to care for those they are most concerned with. Too much material baggage is a liability in the wild. You cannot allow yourself to have too many attachments lest they weigh you down. You must only select the items that are needful for your survival and totally forego everything else, keeping only the bare necessities. As an animal in the jungle, the Kritika native does not only kill to not be killed, but he also kills to acquire. He finds himself lacking in resources, food, shelter, and even sexual partners. He does what is necessary for their acquisition, be it involve themselves in the trade of illicit products like drugs and guns and other dangerous goods, or even going as far as eliminating individuals who stand in their way. This is the wilderness where anything goes, and the only mission is to keep from perishing. In these early stages of Kritika, we are taught that we cannot allow ourselves to be overly empathetic with others, as this can lead to our own demise. We should instead listen to our instincts that tell us to value our own lives over those of others. Mother Nature goes by different laws in society. Society values compassion and neighborliness, whereas nature gives way to selfishness and tribalism. This struggle between man and nature is not merely an external one, but it is also internal. Earlier we saw how Kritika had to forego compassion and softness and other such qualities that spell disaster for itself. It had to quiet the voice of empathy and bury it within itself what causes little disturbance. Kritika had to give himself over to his beastly self to wrestle and win the battle against Mother Nature's external forces. These external forces included one's enemies and surrounding predators, starvation, and even one's own physical weaknesses. But of course, to inflict harm upon others, one must necessarily repress one's inborn sympathy for others, and in a way deny them their humanity. We considered some of its external battles, but now we will consider the internal weaknesses that define Kritika's struggle with its sensual self. Man in his most savage is not only survivalistic, but he also gives himself over to lusts and other pleasures. Kritika is a Kama nakshatra. The nakshatra itself represents Agni. When the moon, Soma, is placed there, it brings out a very lustful side to it, since Agni and Soma represent the foundational sexual energies of feminine and masculine, fire and water. Kritika natives naturally battle with a lot of lustful thoughts and desires, but the goal of this nakshatra is to overcome them. One classic tale that illustrates this is that of Agni and his struggle with lust. Agni, another deity of Kritika, was once so overcome with lusts for the 7 wives of the 7 sages, he decided to disguise himself as their home fireplace. After coming to his senses, he reproached himself and left in shame. But then another goddess, Svaha, being herself desirous of Agni, disguised herself as each one of the wives and visited Agni in succession and laid with him. Agni, observing this opportunity to be with his object of desire, totally abandoned himself to each one of them as they approached him. We must recall again that this early side of Kritika is no different from a lowly, hungry animal that has no morals and simply gives himself over to his instincts. Now, there are other tales that further illustrate this, but that are more modern in their context. We have the example of the story of Tannhauser, which was popularized by Richard Wagner's opera. Richard Wagner himself was the Kritika's son and Venus, and his C-rated birth time puts his ascendant also on Kritika. Tannhauser tells the story of a young man who wanders into the other world, where he encounters an aspect of the goddess Venus. Venus, of course, represents the abandoning of the self to the pleasures of the lower senses. Venus's red flesh and lolling tongue dissolve the intellect of the civilized man and even the hard-earned virtues of the soul into its wet abyss. Upon becoming acquainted with Venus, Tannhauser worships her for years and years until one day something inside of him alerts him and he decides that he must return to his homeland and abandon Venus. Because she wants him to stay, her first strategy is to lull him back into her arms with her pleasant voice and wiles of seduction. But when she sees he is stubbornly resistant, the goddess Venus reveals her ferocious side and curses Tannhauser. But Tannhauser prays to the Virgin Mary and is successfully freed from Venus' spell. The Virgin Mary in this case is to represent all that Venus is not. Whereas Venus is shameless and naked, the Virgin Mary is covered from head to toe. The Virgin Mary is to represent piety and the giving up of sensuality for higher virtues. After escaping Venus's clutches, he tries to get back to his normal life, which is the life of a Christian, and tries to find his way back to conservative Christian society. But internally, he struggled with a desire to return to Venus. In the famous opera, this inner turmoil is projected upon everyone around him. In the famous opera by Wagner, in a dramatic singing battle between Wolfram and Tannhauser himself, Wolfram sings about love and how pure and spiritually blissful it is, but because Tannhauser was blinded by his own disgust of his own self, upon hearing his rival, Wolfram sing, he does not accept love as anything good but instead evil. Tannhauser assumes a combative stance and begins singing about the true nature of love, expressing his contempt for it, singing that it is carnal and appeals only to the flesh. But as he sings, he begins to allow force to take hold of him, and then from his lips break hymns to goddess Venus.
Les autres que l'on sent vivre, le cœur qui bat auprès du mien, le cordon l'homme qui m'anime, me lance en être avec les miens. En ce flash fort, mon cœur s'enivre, sans un l'amour n'est rien pour moi.
But of course, these praises of the goddess Venus are not appreciated by the Christian society. Everyone expresses offense and disgust at this unbridled display of lust. And later on, the Christian public discovers that Tannhauser once descended into the pits of goddess Venus. and upon realizing this, everyone attempts to exile him forever. He gives himself over to her worship, and in the end he fights to return to the other world to be reunited with his goddess of lust. Kritika Nakshatra is marked by the war between passion and piety. We can take the next classical example of Paradise Lost, written by John Milton, who is most likely a Kritika moon. The classic work is an epic poem based on the book of Genesis. It once again tells the story of the struggle of man between obeying God and allowing himself to be seduced by passion. Adam, as chief protagonist, is made to choose between following the simple instruction of his creator and allowing himself to fall prey to the foolishness of his playmate Eve. Adam is encouraged to sin, to take a bite out of the forbidden fruit after having been persuaded to partake of it by the charms of his beautiful lover, who in this case is animated by Satan, the devil. Adam knows that the fruit is death, but he chooses it anyways, renouncing his inner light to dissolve into the blackness of his passion. Venus, which represents women in general, is said to be the priest of the Asuras, a class of entities often seen as demonic. The reasons for this are easy to understand. The demons and Satan use Venus as their main weapon in their war against man. Since man's will, which is steel-like, is easily eroded by Venus's gentle licks. Saturn and Venus are best friends in Vedic astrology. And since Saturn is the divider, the planet that veils the divine in darkness and separates the divine from itself to create polarity, it has often been connected to Satan. Saturn divides not only the divine from itself, but also divides man from God. You will recall that one way he does this is in Bharani Nakshatra, whose deity Yama traps man's light within a body such that he cannot perceive it. Saturn as a planet wishes to chain the light of the divine, which includes its many rays, which are the souls of man, and bring them to their knees. Working together, both Venus and Saturn overwhelm the will of man and subjugate him, by drowning the whispers of the soul under the moans of the flesh, and dazzling the eye such that it does not close and recede back into the immaterial. One of the goals of Kritika Nakshatra is true independence, which can only happen when one fully embodies their individual will, which is a blessing from God. Because Venus and Saturn work against the will, part of the path of Kritika is to resist them, continuing with the plot of the book, Paradise Lost. In the end, when lucidity prevails, Adam is struck with the incomprehensible guilt of what he has done and then is severely punished. He and his lover are stripped of their ethereal nature and are forced to walk the earth as lowly creatures. They lost the sight of God, the light that burnt away the shadows of Mother Nature. Now existing outside of that light, they are thrown fully into the mouth of Mother Nature and forced to live as the beasts live. As beasts know not the sight of God, as they operate purely on instinct. In the first part of this essay, we describe the initial stage of Kritika Nakshatra, the beast, hunting, killing, and giving himself over to his lusts, knowing not the greater implications of his deeds. But in this section, we will be discussing the inner consequences of past actions, and we will introduce this with one of the most important symbols of Agni, lightning. Agni, the deity of Kritika Nakshatra, is said to exist in three forms: on earth as fire, in the atmosphere as lightning, and in the sky as the sun. As a means of tying all these symbols together in an easy-to-understand narrative, one can consider fire, at its most mundane, as relating to the necessity of the caveman, which is Kritika's earliest manifestation. The sun is the light of the soul and the virtues of heaven, and so relates to the final expression of Kritika, which we will explore shortly. Enlightening is the intermediary stage between the two, where one gains shocking revelations about life, reality, and especially one's own self and actions. Lightning strikes are devastating and wreak havoc. Thunder, which often accompanies these frightening strikes of light, petrify us with their incomprehensible howls, as if a higher being were expressing a deep disapproval of our actions. Standing over his chariot of dark clouds, his screams resound through the atmosphere. The howls of the storm are meant to represent the torment of the soul. The lightning strikes are the shocking revelations of the true weight of our deeds. The screams of the soul are at first incomprehensible, because the flesh cannot properly interface with the soul, much how the heaven cannot directly communicate to earth, and so these first attempts of the soul are painful and torturesome. These messages of the soul strike with a violence, not least because they express the individual's guilt and the sorrow experienced by their celestial body. Earlier, we observed an individual having to do whatever it is he needed to do for his own survival and the survival of his clan, even if it meant stealing, killing, and other acts of violence or evil. We also observed him give himself over to his lowliest desires, and all of this seemingly without consequence. But unbeknownst to him, his internal storm was brewing, and before he knew it, he was brought to his knees by his own inner clamoring. Now we were seeing a clearer picture of the path of Kritika. Where at first he was a beast, a caveman, a Neanderthal, as savage as the most savage among them, he was then cursed by evolution, the baptism of the intellect, which would set him apart from all other animals. This strike of light is his initiation into true manhood, and wrestling with a soul is his prerequisite. This aspect of Kritika is illustrated wonderfully in the character Angel, played by the Kritika's son and possibly also Kritika Moon native David Boreanaz. Angel is a vampire, but is unique in that he is a vampire with a soul. This is a twist in the often told myth, as vampires are often thought to be demons in possession of human bodies, and the actual essence of the human, the soul, is thought to be departed. Even before he was sired, he lived as a drunken vagabond, but after being transformed into a vampire, he began a sadistic streak of carnage, earning a reputation as one of the most terrible and hedonistic of vampires. Angel was sired by Darla, played by the actress Julie Benz, who is herself a Bharni son. Again, Bharni represents the teeth of Mother Nature, which brings out the more beastly side of Kritika. Bharni, also being a barbarian nakshatra and representing the vagina and female sexuality, also represents the Venusian forces that erode the will of man. In this sense, Bharni represents both Saturn, through Yama, and Venus, through the Yoni, both of which are forces that bring out Kritika's uglier side, and are forces Kritika is meant to overcome, as man is meant to overcome Mother Nature. Angel's origin story reflects the earlier phases of Kritika. Angel, Darla, and their group of vampires went on centuries-long rampages, setting towns on fire, rejoicing in orgasmic festivities, always with a trail of innocent blood left behind them. They were unique in that they did not only kill to live, but they killed for pleasure, representing how totally they had given themselves over to their inner animal. This is Agni at his most indulgent, devouring whatever comes before him, devouring towns and forests and even children. But one day, Angel makes the mistake of violating the wrong person. The victim of his latest crime was the favorite daughter of a Romanian tribe. Their vengeance was in using their special magic powers to bring back his soul.
It hurts, yes. Good. It will hurt more. Where am I? You don't remember. Everything you've done for 100 years. In a moment you will. The face of everyone you killed. Our daughter's face. They will haunt you. And you will know what true suffering is. Killed. I don't. No. No.
Whereas before, Angel was but a beast, senselessly destroying all that was in his path, now he was cursed with a conscience, which meant that he would now endlessly reflect upon all of the evils he had caused to the innocents about him. Before, the whispers of his soul were silenced, but now they screeched violently as the reel of faces of his innumerable victims rolled endlessly in his mind, almost killing him if he were not already immortal. This Romanian curse was a strike of lightning, the light or consciousness which would set him on the path of becoming a higher being. For a long time after this curse, Angel could no longer bring himself to kill humans, lest his own soul choke him out of guilt. And so, he only drinks the blood of alley rats or bags of blood from hospitals. His shame and disgust of his own self is so great, for decades or even centuries, he hid in shadows, representing how much he does not want to confront himself to his own deeds. Despite all these difficulties, he grows to love his soul and wishes to keep it, and sets himself on the path of doing what he believes to be right and no longer shying away from his duties and responsibilities, but instead confronting his shadows head on. But there is one final caveat to his curse. If he ever experiences true happiness, he will lose his soul and he will revert back to his unevolved vampiric states. So we first witnessed this Kritika archetype being torn to shreds by the memories of his actions, and then also watch him brood as he considers the life of a hermit. Before he gave himself over to hedonism, but now he so severely denies himself any joy of the flesh, lest he unravel again. The element of Angel's story, that of not drinking human blood, is reminiscent of another tale of vampires, Twilight. Edward Cullen, portrayed by Kritika's son native Robert Pattinson, only drinks animal bloods, having sworn off the blood of humans, which is unique even in the Twilight universe, as vampires freely drink of the blood of humans. But this is a struggle for him, especially after encountering Bella, who tempts him more than any other human.
I wanted to kill you. I've never wanted a human's blood so much in my life. My family, we're different from others of our kind. We only hunt animals. We learn to control our thirst. But it's you. Your scent. It's like a drug to me. You're like my own personal brand of heroin.
Why did you hate me so much when we met?
I did. Only for making me want you so badly.
An interesting quote in their dialogue is, "So the lion fell in love with the lamb," which illustrates again this twisted dynamic between Kritika Nakshatra and its object of desire. Agni wants to be fed, but risks giving himself over to his insatiable desires. He wants to partake of pleasurable experiences, but is afraid of totally devouring his object of desire until it is reduced to ash, and he himself is also lost along with it to lust. One important difference between Angel's relationship with Darla and Edward's relationship with Bella is the following. Darla's Bharani placement pulls Angel's Kritika placement back into its unbridled and uncontrolled beastly self. Darla was originally the agent of Angel's savagery, and because Angel is determined to maintain his sanctity, he is wary of Darla. Edward does not have the same concern with Bella. And curiously, Bella, or Kristen Stewart, the actress that plays Bella, is in possession of Rohini placements. Whereas Bharani is the feminine form from which Kritika must escape and conquer to not dissolve within her palate, Rohini is the feminine that Kritika molds and gives shape to. The plenty and abundance of Rohini is thanks to the self-mastery possessed by Kritika that allows for the glories of civilization. In this context, Rohini inspires Kritika to evolve, but Bharani Nakshatra provokes its devolution. From a Kabbalistic perspective, Kritika Nakshatra is torn between the sphere of Gebura and the sphere of Chesed, the 19th path. Gebura is ruled by the planet Mars, which is the planet of our animal selves that acts selfishly and is carnal by nature. At its most individualistic, Mars hunts, kills, destroys for its own survival. Opposite to Mars is the sphere ruled by Jupiter, which represents the collective conscious and recognizes the need for empathy, compassion, mercy, in seeing others as an extension of oneself. In this tension, Mars represents the self and its own interests, and Jupiter represents the collective and other humans. One of the symbols of the 19th path is the serpent, which can represent the uncoiling of the beast within us as it leans towards Gebura, or the negation of this carnal instinct by focusing on the heart and the ways of compassion, which is more towards the side of Jupiter. Another symbol of this path is the Major Arcana card, the Strength card of the Tarot, which also represents the balance between giving oneself over to the fires of the instincts or the coolness of reason, balancing one's burning lust with logic. This balance is the path of the Kritika Nakshatra native, but also the Vishaka Nakshatra native, which we will explore in a future video. Whereas Kritika starts out in the beastly fire and then moves closer to the center, it is Vishaka that starts out in the total denial of their own instincts and then moves closer to the center itself. The Strength card is parallel to the goddess Bagalamukhi, as they both represent mastery over the carnal forces within an individual and also over external animal forces, leading to victory and domination. Both the Strength card and Devi Bagala stop and tame uncontrollable thoughts before they run amok and allow for the proper expression of energy. Carnality provokes agitation, which allows for a lack of control, but with the power of Stambhana Shakti, the power to stop and hold all forces and energies, Devi Bagala allows for the development of the will and self-mastery. Worshipping the goddess is then very auspicious for anyone who suffers from a lack of self-control and is susceptible to attacks, whether physical or psychic. We see that the vampire trope is one very much populated by Kritika natives, as well as the other Sun Nakshatras. From the Vampire Diaries star Joseph Morgan, who possesses a Kritika sun, to popular retro movies like Near Dark, which stars the Kritika sun native Bill Paxton. We have the original author of the book The Hunger, on which is based the cult movie, also called The Hunger, with Lee Strieber, who is a Kritika ascendant, to even the very old 1922 movie Nosferatu, which stars the possibly Kritika moon native Max Schreck. The vampire trope combines the two earlier animal sides of Kritika, both the beast of the jungle and the beast that gives himself over to lust. Vampires are often seen as representing individuals who have so totally abandoned themselves to hedonism as to be rejected by society and so hide in shadow to not be discovered. It's curious that Bram Stoker, the writer of Dracula, was suspected of being a homosexual. He was allegedly inspired to write the tale of Dracula after the imprisonment of his friend Oscar Wilde, who is believed to have been a homosexual himself. It's interesting that solar individuals, whether individuals with sun conjunct their moon, like the writer of Dracula, Bram Stoker, or Sun Nakshatra natives like Karl Freund, who is an Uttarashada sun, and Todd Browning, who is most likely an Uttara Palguni moon, who directed the 1931 movie Dracula inspired by Stoker. The sun is the giver of light. It burns the shadows in the darkest caves and slays the beasts. In many of these movies and series, we find man either devolving further into a state of a creature of the night, or evolving from this and finding for himself a soul. The darkness and shadows hide the beast and allow him to get away with this revolting carnality. But the vampire burning under the light of the sun can be seen as representing the Kritika native finally being confronted with the terror of the evil he has committed, and then spontaneously combusting from the guilt of sin. How curious that solar individuals are attracted to these ideas. Kritika specifically, but solar individuals generally, are caught between this tug of war. suffering from a need to rid themselves of their inner shadows, but also clinging to them, believing that these vices nourish them. But in actual fact, in giving into these vices, they sink deeper and deeper into darkness and then struggle to find their way into the light, lest they burn with the very sins to which they are so attached. The path of the Kritika native is to set fire to vampirism, to no longer crawl in the shadows like a creature of the night, to never give in to vice and hide in blackness, but to walk as a man in the light of day. The two nakshatra planetary groups we see most involved in this vampire trope are Sun Nakshatras and Venus Nakshatras, but for different reasons that I shall explore in the future. Another story that illustrates this tension between instinct and reason, or animal versus man, is Batman. The original story was created by two men. One was Bill Finger, and the other was the possibly Kritika Moon native, Bob Crane. Batman's origin story is that of a young boy who witnesses his own parents' vicious murder, which leaves him a scarred orphan for life. As an adult, he decides to take on a secret identity that would allow him freedom to dispense senseless vengeance upon the criminals of the city, whom he blames as a collective for his childhood traumas. He is a most frightening character, dressed in black or very dark colors, with a mask and demeanor designed to strike fear in the hearts of his prey. And although he seems to be doing good from the outside by targeting bad guys, his presence is deeply unsettling to all people, innocent and guilty alike. It is only later when he realizes the error of his own ways, that it is not right to mindlessly torture small-time criminals as payback for the crimes committed against his childhood self, and recognizes that even these ne'er-do-wellers are human themselves, that he begins to correct himself and introduce a more stringent moral code to his work. Originally, Batman was as much a savage as the very savages he would hunt down. In his thirst for vengeance, he lost his own humanity, or, to follow along the lines established by the tales of Angel, he lost his own soul, and to regain it, he needed to burn the darkness within him to make space for light. Angel, Edward Cullen, and Batman are all examples of how the Kritika native, with his own internal struggles, is always wrestling to maintain a sense of control over his own self, whether wrestling against lust, or childhood trauma, or vengeance, or even the most basic physiological needs like hunger. Each one needed to tame the animal within them to achieve a state of conscious manhood. According to the Garuda Puranas, Skanda or Kartikeya is also an incarnation of Lord Kamadeva, the god that personifies lust and all carnal pleasures, which not only include the pleasures of women and wine, but also the intensity of rage and other rajasic emotions. One of Kamadeva's names is Madana, which means intoxication, illustrating the insanity and lack of control that arises from intense desires, which helps us understand how passionate Kritika Nakshatra is and how hard to control its passions are. Controlling itself is the feat of a hero. Kritika Nakshatra can be described as the combination between the Sun and Venus. Kritika is associated with the Sun in two ways. The first is the rather controversial concept of Vimshotri Dasha Lords, but the second is what I have earlier discussed. Agni, the deity of Kritika, exists in three forms: as fire on earth, lightning in the atmosphere, and finally as the actual sun itself in the sky. Shiva is also associated with the nakshatra of Kritika. Kartikeya or Skanda is said to be born from the spilt semen of Shiva himself. Shiva is also associated with the sun as a plant because both are supposed to be inanimate and existing outside of manifestation in an unshakable yogic state. The combination of Sun and Venus, then, can be understood in the classic tale of Shiva and Kamadeva, the god of yoga and the god of carnality. The story is told thus. Shiva was in a deep and unshakable meditative state and could not be taken out of it by anyone. But the world needed Shiva to defeat a great evil. Everyone scrambled as to what to do, and finally decided that only Kamadeva could distract and interrupt Shiva's meditative flow. So Kamadeva assailed Shiva with his flower arrows of passion and brought him out of his deep states. When Shiva saw his consorts, his wife, he was inflamed with passion and desire. But as he slowly started to realize what was done to him, he looked behind him and he saw Kamadeva hiding. That same passion that he had towards his wife turned to rage and he destroyed the god of love. This story gives us the fundamental essence of the Sun and Venus conjunction. Such an individual, even as he attempts to keep himself on one path, will find himself easily distracted and compelled to act in ways so carnal that it later brings shame upon his head. Such an individual would be one who struggles to rid himself of lustful thoughts, but would routinely find himself prey to the traps of the exciting Venus. I provided one solution against the agitations of the body and mind, and that was the worship of the goddess that paralyzes all movement, including the throbbings of the flesh and the agitations of the mind, Devi Bagalamukhi. But meditating on the Manipura chakra and chanting the Ram Bija can also help with the development of the will. The Manipura chakra contains the Ram Bija within it, but around it possesses the syllables which correspond to the spiritual vrittis of ignorance, thirst, jealousy, treachery, shame, fear, disgust, delusion, foolishness, and sadness, which are all qualities to which the Kritika native is susceptible to falling prey. I would like to add 2 more stories to illustrate this tug of war between man and beast and how victimized Kritika Nakshatra is by its own intoxicating lust. First, the 1938 movie La Bête Humaine, or in English, The Human Beast, starring Kritika's Sun native Jean Gabin. In the movie, Jean Gabin's character is called Lantier, who struggles with sensual passions, particularly alcohol and women. And to distract himself from these devilish thoughts, he overoccupies himself with his trains, being himself a railroad engineer. One early example in the movie of his inability to control himself around women is observed when he goes to visit his aunts. During a stop for repairs in Le Havre, Lantier goes to his aunt's nearby village where he meets a girl, a former girlfriend. The two walk and sit by the railroad tracks, but as they embrace, his hands tighten on her neck, and he is stopped from strangling her, only by the sudden roar of a passing train. Even just one taste of the feminine threatens to lure the beast from its cave. Back on the train, there is a violent altercation that occurs with another set of characters, with whom Lantier is not yet entangled. A woman with a torrid affair is confronted by her husband with her lover. Her husband murders her lover, but the incident is later discovered by Lantier, who threatens to go to the police, but is persuaded against it by the woman, and instead, the blame is cast on an innocent man. Later, Lantier, the Kritika's Sun native, and the woman begin their own affair as the woman's husband laments his violent sin and sinks into a depressive state. Taking advantage of Lantier, the woman seduces him into murdering her husband so that she could be free from him. Lantier, the Kritika's Sun native, resists this, insisting that it is a crime too great. But when the woman threatens to leave him, he acquiesces and agrees to try to kill him. But before he manages an opportunity, because his inner animal had been so aggressively stirred by their relationship,
Qu'est-ce que tu as? Jacques.
he accidentally kills the woman herself. And in the end, he kills himself too, likely out of a deep sense of guilt that he can no longer shake off. The second story I would like to share is the movie The Great Sinner, starring the Kritika Moon native. The second story is the movie The Great Sinner, starring the Kritika Moon and Ascendant native Gregory Peck as Fedya. Gregory's character is first introduced as intelligent and sober, in an environment where people uncontrollably give themselves over to their addiction of gambling. One man who severely struggles with the habit even steals from Gregory's character, But, pitying him, he offers him money to leave this sinful town. But instead, this man squanders even this charity on his addiction. Gregory Peck's character sees how dangerous the game is. Gregory Peck's character can see how dangerous this game is, but it is his infatuation with another character, Pauline, that thrusts him into this card shuffling and Russian roulette spinning world firsthand. Now, the issue with Pauline is that she is to be married to another man whom Gregory's character is not convinced she loves. Pauline's father racked up a huge debt in the casino, which is owned by her betrothed, so Gregory, for his own selfish reasons, decides to free her from this arrangement. Since he is not a wealthy man himself, his only money-making scheme is playing the game as everyone else does, and so he begins gambling. Though initially he earns a lot of money, he is quickly hooked on the game and is trapped in the loop of the roulette like all the other sad souls there, to the extent that he even sells all of his possessions and even goes as far as to borrow money from Pauline's fiancé himself to continue playing. Whether he continues to do so to win Pauline over or to experience the short-lived highs of winning is now unclear. By the end of the movie, he is totally financially ruined, and he even begins to contemplate his own suicide. Here we find once again Venus and her wiles calling the naked savage from his cave only for him to be shamed and destroyed. Community and civilization are observed. As the central fire, it is connected to religion in a more orthodox sense because it represents the collective coming together and taming their instincts to be able to coexist. An individual with a purely survivalistic and individualistic temperament, as symbolized by the planet Mars and the sphere of Gabuda, is too savage. In order to exist in any type of society, the individual must master himself. One could say that there are three types of people: the sheep, the savage, and the shepherd. The true lessons of Kritika are indeed to evolve from the state of a savage, but not to enter into the state of a sheep, for a sheep is a man that is domesticated by others. A sheep is still an animal. Whether one is a sheep or a savage, one is still an animal, and one has no control over oneself. One either gives into the instincts or gives into the demands of the collective. Mars more so represents acting upon instincts, whereas Jupiter, the collectivistic planet, represents domestication and being tamed by others, by the orders of society. The path of Kritika is to obey only the soul, which is one's true will, which is neither savage nor a sheep, but indeed a master. I would like to thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed my video, then please like, comment, and share it to promote it. Also, if you'd like to know more about astrology and the occult, have access to some of the most unique and interesting insights on the matter, and also to support me in my journey, then please join me on Patreon.